before I share my screen, thanks to Enos, thank you so much. She copy and pasted questions from the chat, and I thought it might be a good review of some of the things that we talked about. I actually can share my screen and show you what she shared with me. If you're a visual learner like I am, it helps to see the questions. I think we resolved a lot of these, but I highlighted some of the ones that maybe are worth revisiting. This one, I noticed that you often start with finding the subject, but there are often many nouns in a sentence. Is it not easier to first identify the verb? And Kirsty, you're absolutely right. We do want to identify the verb first. So if I said, look for the subject, I misspoke. We do want to look for that action word because they're easier to find, for one thing, right? They're concrete, you see action. And then from there, you say, okay, what's the action? Who's doing it? And then you get to your noun and your subject. And to your point, nouns are very pervasive in sentences because they can be the subject and they can be the object. They can be the object of the preposition. In fact, they are the object of the preposition. So they function in different roles, which makes them challenging too. But keep thinking about the fact that they name something, and that helps. Because noun, that word is not really helpful for kids. If they tell you it's a person, place, or thing, you want to prompt them and say, what does it do? Okay, what does the verb do? It shows action or it links. What does the noun do? It names something. It names a person, place, or thing. What does an adjective do? It describes, right? So those are important words to get to the function of the part of speech. I think we got to the heart of phrase and clause. I hope that's still good for you, and you're getting more comfortable with that. What would the analysis be used, or how would we use it within the literacy block? And that's something that I hope we can talk about more today, because today we're going to focus on lesson planning. This question that came up, that Catherine asked, is about, sort of, well, it's a big question. A whole lot of you are teaching French immersion. More than half the kids in your classrooms are French immersion students. And you only have 1 hour of language per day, less with snowsuits. I love that. I'm sure that takes valuable time, instructional time away with little ones. And you don't have enough time to fit it all in, and I understand that too. They have no English instruction in grade 1 at all, which, wow, that's very challenging. So if you're teaching grade 2 and a 3-4 this year, then you have to really try to close the gap for those students who haven't learned about English. So I'm going to try to address some of those things today. And again, this is, as you know, I'm going to share slides, but I really value the conversations that we can have. And hopefully the questions that you have as we go through the morning are questions that are relevant for other people as well. These elements of texts that Erin asked about yesterday, here's the definition, which is helpful. And it was kind of what I was thinking. All the things that we know texts have inherent in them. Scope and sequence for teaching this material. I'm going to show you a couple scope and sequences today. So hopefully those are helpful. Considerations for program planning for MLLs. I'm going to show you a website that I found last night. I didn't have a chance to explore it as much as I wanted to, but I think you'll find it helpful. And I'm going to just show you what I saw that when I looked at it. And then talking about assessments, I'm going to spend time with that as well. So without further ado, let me go to my PowerPoint. So I'm going to start by talking about multilingual learners before I get into lesson planning. And I want to show you this toolkit, as I think it's pretty comprehensive. Has anyone seen this before? It was new to me too. So the multilingual learning toolkit, resources supporting pre-K to third multilingual children. I think it probably could go beyond that, but it has just a wealth of information, instructional strategies, a resource search. If you are a faculty member, you have courses in here. But I'm just going to click on the user guide for teachers. And I'm going to scroll down to strategies and resources, instructional strategies and resources. So they divide the content into family engagement, social emotional health and development, classroom environment, oral language development, which I really want to explore further because you know how I feel about oral language. But the classroom environment looked like it had some great stuff. The literacy development of multilingual learners, bilingual classrooms, home language development. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff. And it looks like it's pretty easy to kind of find your way through. But what I noticed when I looked at this, and I looked at it again this morning, let's look at this. It has these questions that are answered, and then it has a lesson plan and resource walk. So it kind of helps you go through where the materials are for any number of things. I haven't, like I said, I haven't taken the time to explore this, but I feel like there's a lot here. So I hope it's helpful, because I will tell you, truth of the matter is, I am not a multilingual expert. My expertise is really in translating the research for teachers. So whenever I find research that I think is important for them to know, I will translate it for them in the best way that I can, or I'm going to point you to resources. One of the things I just was looking for this morning, and I found it finally, is a contrastive analysis of languages. So in your day 4 handout folder, I hope I put it in here. I believe I did. Although I don't see it now. What did I do with it? Hold on. This is
just
what
added it to the chat, so it's there if it's not in the folder.
Okay.
And we can get it into the folder after if that's helpful.
That's very helpful. I just want to show you this real quick because I think it might be helpful, especially considering the fact that you're teaching many different languages, or you're not teaching them, but you're teaching students who speak many different languages, not just French, not just Spanish, but a host of languages. Oopsie daisy. I can't get it, but I sent it to you. So bear with me. Got too much going on here. I sent it to you, so I'm going to find it in the, hard to move things around on my screen. Okay, I just sent it. Sent. Here it is. Okay, can you see this document? Everybody? Okay, good. So a contrastive analysis is when we're looking at, it's a term that's used in linguistics, but it's basically comparing two languages. So have any of you heard of the program Language Exclamation Mark? Probably not. It was a program that was written by a woman named Jane Fell Green, an Orton Gillingham expert who wanted to develop a program for older students. And it's an excellent program. It's not used much anymore, and I loved it. I taught it for many years. But what this does is it looks at, and I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger, but you have this handout, so you'll get it and you'll see it. Let me see if I can get this bigger. Okay, is that better? Okay, so what you're going to see here on this is a 26-page handout, is you're going to see an analysis, a contrastive analysis between American English and other languages, including dialects. So you're looking at phonological variations, you're looking at morphological variations, and you're looking at syntactic variations. And I like this so much, I just copied the teacher's manual, and that's what you see. So if it's not, you can see it's cut off here because I couldn't, it was hard to copy it. But this is Southern American English, which doesn't pertain to you. This is Native American English. We've got Hispanic American English, Appalachian English, African American Vernacular English, Vietnamese, Spanish, Russian, Portuguese, Filipino, Korean. Sorry for scrolling fast, but just so you see what's here. I don't know if we're going to get French here. I hope so, but we only have 2 more pages. Shoot, no French. Let me see if I can find a French one. But what I'm going to go back to, let's see here. Let me go back. Close your eyes. I don't want to make you dizzy. Close your eyes. I want to go back to Spanish. Okay, now you can open your eyes. So it does a pretty deep dive into phonological variations. Oh, that's Vietnamese. In morphological variations, past tense, and then syntactic variations. What is it about Spanish that distinguishes it from English in terms of syntax? The word order is different, right? Articles are different, prepositions. Although Spanish uses prepositions, their meanings and the ways in which they're used may or may not match with corresponding English prepositions. And it goes on. Negation. I not have found the book is a Spanish negation. I haven't found the book. So indefinite pronouns. Because of the difficulty Spanish speakers have with negation in English, there's also difficulty using indefinite pronouns. And again, it just continues. Lots of differences in phonological aspects of English and Spanish. So I think the point of this is that we want to think about the languages that our kids are speaking. One thing to think about is it an alphabetic language, right? Or is it a non-alphabetic language? In other words, is it Chinese? Then we have to explain to our students that English is an alphabetic language. That means it has letters that correspond to sounds, whereas Chinese is a logographic language, right? It has characters that represent meaning. So it's really important to explicitly say that. We can't possibly, I don't know how many languages are spoken in Ontario, but in the United States, we have hundreds of languages. We can't possibly understand and be able to help students that speak all those languages. The best that we can do is understand the differences between the language that those children speak and ours, and at a broad level. Right? What are the phonological differences? What are the sounds that French speakers, for example, have in their language that we don't have in English? And conversely, the sounds that we have in English that French speakers don't have. And just saying that is, I think, extremely valuable. And I'm sure that there are people that are experts in bilingual and biliteracy with French that have done that work. It's just not my wheelhouse. So, is there anything beyond that that anybody wants to talk about or share with me before we move on? Thank you, Sarah, for sharing the phonological. Yeah, although French isn't listed, right? I know, and I don't understand why French isn't listed because it's a pretty popular language, especially in Canada, right? Especially in Ontario, I imagine. Other provinces in Canada as well, I'm sure. Right. So I can't explain that. All I can say is I wish that there was more teacher training on how to support kids that are English learners. It is a huge problem because we have more and more, I'm sure it's true in Canada as it is here, more and more students that are coming to us speaking a different language. And we have to sort out what is the reality of their situation. And also there's a big debate about dual language learning. You know, ideally, it would be great for our students to be bilingual and biliterate, but how do we do that effectively? Like, how do we teach English well and that other language well, both from an oral language perspective and from a written language perspective? There's not enough time in the day, is the truth of the matter. And if the powers that be wanted us to do that, they have to give us the resources to do that. They have to give us smaller classes because there's no way we can do this with 25 kids. Absolutely no way. So I don't want to bum you out by saying all this, but I want to just acknowledge, yeah, that this is a challenge. Kirsty said, I'm also amazed that it refers to First Nation languages as if they are all similar. And I agree. This document that I share is really, it's old. It's probably, I don't know, language is 15, 20 years old. So it's old. It hasn't been updated. But again, I am always looking for resources that I think are important to share as much as I can. So that's the point of that. So let me go back to my PowerPoint since I digressed. And show the outline for today, which is we're going to talk about lesson planning. And to segue into that, I want to show you a slide that I showed you, I think at the beginning on Monday, this infographic that IDA put together to show the what of structured literacy. And by the way, structured literacy is an inclusive term that refers to instruction that is based in the structure of language, right? And so I showed you this slide at the on Monday, demonstrating sort of this overview of kind of looking at the simple view and more, because we have divided our content into word recognition and comprehension, and we see sentence structure and grammar here. So I was just showing the outline, and now I'm showing this. And I'm going to come back to this later, but just showing you where comprehension and composition are in the same kind of side of the infographic. And then how many of you have seen this? Have you seen the writing rope? Some of you are shaking your heads. Excellent. Joan Sedita, I think, did a great job of capturing the complexity of writing. And she divided the content up into these 5 buckets. And so here you see syntax. And she's done a lot of great work with syntax as well. And I recommend that you look at her website for lots of great information. And of course, you saw this yesterday. This is our graphic. It includes a lot of the same things that are here, but it's just organized a little differently. So in terms of thinking about our lesson planning, I want us to think about a couple of things. All of these things are important, but I want to really focus on today explicit instruction and this idea of cumulative and sequential presentation of content and skills. So in addition to that, infographic shows us the what of structured literacy. It also shows us the how. How do we teach? It doesn't matter if we're talking about math, science, social studies, English language arts, music, art, right? There's certain pedagogical principles that we know are important. And this is a handout in your folder. That infographic is there. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I'm going to take several of them and go deeper with them. And I want to show you this. This infographic is also in the handout, I believe. If it's not there, tell me, because I want you to make sure you have it. And this is taking a pretty complex idea and really going into detail. What do we mean by explicit instruction? What does that look like in the context of a lesson? And this is the reference here is Anita Archer, who I'm sure almost all of you, if not all of you, know who she is. She's a guru, and she is the guru when we think about explicit instruction. And her co-author, Charles Hughes. But I love the way this is laid out, showing us the opening. What does that look like in terms of an explicit lesson? What do we do to preview, review? What is the I do, we do, you do? What does that consist of? And what I will say is the I do is super important, right? That's where the explicit instruction comes in. But the we do is often a part that teachers leave out. They go from I do to you do, practice, and they don't do enough of the we do to ensure that the kid is getting it. The whole point of a we do is to see as you're working through these skills and concepts is whether or not the kid is learning it, right? You're teaching the heck out of the concept, but we don't know they're ready for that independent practice until we've observed them while we're demonstrating that concept. So it talks about the prompts and also how you're going to reduce the scaffolding during that that guided practice. So important. And then the unprompted practice, the you do. And then the closing is like the review or a preview for the next lesson. So I just think this is a nice graphic organizer for showing that. I've talked about William Van Cleve, and I think, you know, his book Writing Matters has just so much great information in it. But in this case, because William Van Cleve was schooled by Diana Hambury King, an Orton Gillingham expert, and they have very close relationship. He worked at Kildonan School in Amenia, New York, with her for many years. So he was her protege. He embeds a lot of this kind of idea of explicit instruction and Orton Gillingham principles into his methodology. So his 5-point instructional strategy is that if you're teaching a new concept, or you may need to review the previous concept, that's the introduction. In the second example, and we're talking specifically here about syntax instruction, you're going to have students identify examples of whatever the concept is. Let's say we're teaching about adjective phrases. They're going to sort words into whatever the categories are as a way to identify examples. And then we might select sentences from their text so that they can actually do some work with the text that they're going to be expected to read. And it's a great way to preview that text. It's a great way to help students get more time practicing the reading, the accuracy, and the automaticity and the prosody that we talked about yesterday. In the third step, The students are creating their own examples in isolation. So this is that independent practice that we just saw in Anita Archer's graphic organizer. And then what I think William did so effectively, and he did this with our mentors beautifully, is he had, a Word document. And as we were going around the room giving examples of, let's say, sentences with adjective clauses, he typed them into the Word doc. And he would have us all go around and do that. Similarly, that's what he would do with his class of students. Okay, give me an example of a sentence that has an adjective clause. And then he would type it, and then he would go back to the sentences, right? And he would, as after they shared their examples, then he would have a conversation with the class for discussion and analysis using their sentences. Sometimes they were correct and sometimes they were incorrect, to clarify and strengthen students' understanding of the concept. It was a very effective strategy and something you could do with a whole class. You might want to be sensitive. So some students are going to be reticent to provide their own examples, and you have to be thoughtful about that, right? Especially the students that have difficulty with expressive language or written language. But he did it in a way that saved face, that was a risk-free environment, because it really was about supporting the students' understanding. Are there any questions about that 5-point instructional strategy? Okay, Aviva and Jenny, you said there was a chart in your in our slides, but couldn't find it as a separate file. Oh, is that that's the graphic organizer? Okay, I will get it to you. I will get it to you. Jamie Clark is the person that put together these graphic organizers, and they're really amazing. If you Google him, you'll find all those graphic organizers, but I'll put that one in the outline. Just making a note. Okay. Any questions about this before I move on? Okay. And this is also from William Van Cleve's work. And this is, if you are familiar with Orton Gillingham, you know that there's always a deck, right? And the deck has graphemes for review, phonemes for review, right? In this case, William believes it would be good warm up to review the grammar terms, right? And so he has the kids, right? The students have these cards. Obviously, it's not the same as the decks that have phonemes and graphemes. Those are big, thick decks. But this is a nice way to sort of think about having the cards, because it's very interactive and everybody can have their own deck and their own cards. And you'll see if you choose to purchase Writing Matters, you can also find a lot of this stuff online. You'll see how he organizes that. So that's a little bit about explicit instruction. Now I want to talk about sequential and cumulative instruction. And when we think about sequential and cumulative instruction, we usually think about a scope and sequence, right? And so this is from Joan Sedita's instruction guidelines for instruction, that is about this writing rope. And this is in your handouts. Let me go to that. And in the handouts, you're going to see the writing rope guidelines for instruction. Can you see this? So you're going to see what I really think she did a beautiful job doing is laying out K-12. Where is transcription taught, right? We teach spelling in K1 and 2. through grade 4 and 5, we're teaching rules and generalizations. We're teaching handwriting, letter formation in K and 1. Keyboarding comes on board in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And she's even color coded this for formal instruction, refinement, ongoing. So I love this. And she's done this for each section of the writing rope. Obviously, the part that I wanted to call your specific attention to was this, the syntax, right? So we're teaching the basic grammar, the idea of a fragment versus a complete sentence, and 4 types of sentences: simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. And this is what she, Joan Sedita, believes is a scope and sequence for teaching that. Clauses and phrases, notice these don't come on until 4th through 6th grade. I think that's when she teaches the terminology, but certainly conceptually, I think we can start helping kids understand conceptually the difference between a phrase that can't stand alone and a clause that has a subject and a predicate. Punctuation is taught right from the beginning, but advanced punctuation goes right through the grades, and sentence elaboration starts right from the beginning, orally first and then in writing. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. It's not easy to do this for some reason. I use a Mac and PCs are better at getting you back to your PowerPoint. So let me try to find it here. Where is it? I had trouble yesterday. There it is. This is what happens when you go back and forth, but I think it's important for you to see the actual documents. Here's another handout that will be even more comprehensive in scope. This is a writing scope and sequence that goes into great detail. I mean, this is a multi-page document. Again, I want to just show you what this looks like. You'll find it here. And it divides the content up into writing at the micro level with transcription skills, capitalization, punctuation. Oh, what happened? Yikes. I don't understand how these things happen. What the heck? It disappeared on me. Oh, there it is. I don't get it. Anyway, here it is again. I'm wanting to show this to you just to see if this is going to be helpful for you to take your time looking at it. Notice we have compound sentences, clauses, all the punctuation. Then we get into parts of speech, and you can see where all of these come online starting in kindergarten. And the types of nouns that are used in writing, the types of pronouns, the types of verbs and adjectives and adverbs, conjunctions, right? And then you get into the quality of writing. So this is extremely detailed, and some of you might not need that detail, but I know that you've all been asking me for guidance on where to start, what is expected. And I also know you have standards that you also have to think about, but I think this is a great comprehensive list. This is another handout that you have that I put together. And this is based on the Common Core. I don't think you have the Common Core in Canada, but this is our Common Core. And last but not least, I felt like this was really helpful. These are pacing guides that you're going to find in the handout, folder, and these come from Writing Revolution. So you can see you have in kindergarten, All of these activities should be practiced orally. When, where, why, conjunction, because, and but, sentence types, statements and questions, fragments, okay, and then revising and editing. And this is more comprehensive than this. I'm just showing you a screenshot, basically, of each. So 3 through 5 pacing guide has the sentences, has note-taking, single paragraph outline, revising, editing, etc. There's a 6-8 pacing guide for those of you who teach middle school. And then there's even a 9-12 pacing guide. I think these are fabulous and fairly recently released by the Writing Revolution, and they're available for free. So they're on the website that I talked about yesterday. Any questions about that? That helpful? Good. Rebecca, I'm just looking at the chat. We have a similar scope and sequence, more detailed. Okay, great. What was the name of the website from yesterday? Oh boy. Well, I don't know the context of it, Aviva. What was the website I was talking about? Oh, was it oh, I know. It was the Writing Revolution website. And so what I said yesterday was that you can go on that website, you can create an account that's free, and you can access book resources on that website. I'm getting a frog in my throat here. I think it's from all the talking I've been doing this week. Okay, another pedagogical principle that we think a lot about and talk a lot about is the idea of multimodal. A lot of people say multisensory. They're very equivalent. But I think the term multimodal, I've been using that term now more than I have multisensory. So when I think about multisensory and multimodal, I'm thinking about presenting the information using more than one modality, and that's just good practice, right? We have the auditory channel, the visual channel, not really thinking too much about the nose. However, when we're teaching the phonemes, we might call attention to the nasal sounds, and right? The mouth is very important in terms of multimodal instruction, both in terms of articulating sounds and just thinking about the production of those sounds, and the modality, the motor output, which is the hand, so the kinesthetic. So we think about language by ear and by eye, which is sensory input, as well as motor output, language by mouth and by hand. And that's Virginia Berninger's work. And she's another one of my mentors who I've learned so much from. The next thing I want to spend time on today is talking about what do we mean by data-driven. And when I think of data-driven, I think about diagnostic and prescriptive. That's a term that we've often heard in conjunction with Orton-Gillingham structured literacy. When you're thinking about diagnostic prescriptive, I'm going to go off screen share for a second, and I just want to probe this a little bit. What do you all think about when you think about diagnostic prescriptive data-driven? If you could just put your thoughts in the chat for a moment. Responsive teaching, great. What else? Martha, Dibbles, Acadians, yeah. So data that is actually going to drive our instruction, informs instruction, right, Michelle? Assessment guides, okay. Exactly, Jenny. It's very important to know your students. And the screening is great, but it's not a diagnostic. So if you really want to know your students, you have to administer diagnostic assessments. And this is where syntax is lagging, right? It falls short of what we know how to do diagnostically with phonemic awareness and phonics. Comprehension is a much broader and more challenging domain. And then you're right, Martha, monitoring to see if our teaching is working. That's really, really important. That goes hand in glove with the screen, the diagnostic, and then you've taught for a while, and is it sticking? Because we could teach till the cows come home. If the student isn't absorbing it, we have to try something else. Good, Desiree, a way to see student learning based on what we're teaching. Excellent. So that's diagnostic and prescriptive. It's very hard, and thank you for asking the question, Sarah. Are there diagnostic measures? Actually, I just rang a bell. There are diagnostic measures, and I did not include them, but I will. There's something called the CFAL, which is published by Acadians, and I'll try to pull that up in a moment. Okay, so thank you for weighing in on that. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. And I'm showing this because, again, I want to orient us to, where we're talking about language structures, syntax, and semantics. And I'm doing that for another reason. Have you ever seen this slide before or heard about the 3 profiles? Martha's nodding her head. I don't know if others of you have seen this. Aviva's saying no. Maybe in the chat real quick, yes or no. Okay. Okay, thank you. Excellent. So some of you have and some of you haven't, but it's still worth talking about this. If we think about the simple view of reading, right? And I don't have it on this slide, but simple view of reading is D. Can you see my cursor? Okay. The simple view, just a reminder, is D times LC equals RC. It's a simple view. It doesn't mean reading is simple. Reading comprehension is complex, and it has 2 distinctly different components. Decoding is about being automatic with retrieving the name of a word, and listening or language comprehension is about being metacognitive. Hollis Scarborough uses the term strategic, but I really like the term metacognitive. And I really like the idea of this mental model. We're thinking about our thought, our reading. We're thinking about what are we understanding here. That's a very different skill or ability than reading words automatically. So if you think about the simple view, we have 4 profiles that we can think about for kids. And why I like this is because I'm always talking to teachers about differentiated instruction as much as you can, right? Even if it's just getting kids into one of 4 buckets. This bucket up here, those kids have good language comprehension and good decoding. They are good to go, right? It doesn't mean they're not going to need explicit instruction here and there. Of course, everybody benefits from that in some ways. Usually it's in spelling, right? A lot of kids who are great readers don't know how to spell unless they've been given explicit instruction in spelling. Okay, but these kids are basically good. The first, really, I think of 3 profiles. The first profile are those students who have good language comprehension, but weak decoding, right? So if you look at this grid, you can see language comprehension going from weak to good, decoding word recognition going from weak to good. So these kids have good language comp, weak decoding. The second profile is the opposite, where the kids have weak language comprehension, right? They're down here, but they have good decoding, and word recognition. And those students are often our English learners, our readers with developmental language disorder, DLD. These kids are students with reading difficulties such as dyslexia. So two different profiles. And then we have kids with what we call mixed reading difficulty. They have difficulty with both language comprehension and word recognition, right? And these, again, are our beginning readers who are learning English, our readers who have difficulties in both domains. Because you can be, and I didn't know this until about a year ago, you can be dyslexic and DLD. Those students are going to have the most pervasive difficulties learning to read and write. So if we think about those profiles, as I said, number one are the kids with dyslexia, right? Word recognition difficulties that are phonologically based for the most part. The second category of students have to focus on oral language and vocabulary because of their language comprehension-based reading difficulties. And the third group have to concentrate on both, right? They have difficulties with both. And this comes from Louise Spear-Swirling's work. And I like to show this from the Reading League's Defining Movement Guide. If you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, it's excellent. You can get it for free. How many of you have seen it? Defining Movement Guide. Okay, well, if you'd like, I can put that in the chat. Not in the chat. I can't get anything into the chat. I'll put it into the handout folder. Because it's a great, if you have a colleague who doesn't know about the science of reading, you can print it out and hand it to them, and it's beautiful. It really explains something complex in a pretty easy to understand way. But when we think about word recognition, these are examples of instructional practices that are aligned to the science of reading, including having students read connected text to build reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. And then these are examples that are not based on the science. And I talked about this when we talked about fluency a couple days ago, that the emphasis on speed or words per minute over accuracy is not helpful for students, especially students who have difficulties with phonological processing, naming speed, etc., processing speed. And then this is a sampling of instructional practices for language comprehension that are based on research. Read alouds with complex texts, robust conversations, and explicit instruction in grammatical structures, which is what we've been talking about for the last few days. This is based on science. This is not. Implicit instruction of grammatical structures is not helpful to our students. That was what we might have done years ago. We know there's no research behind. Here's a page of sentences, find the nouns, find the verbs, find the subjects, find the predicates. That's not going to get the job done. So thinking about these profiles, like I said, dyslexia, and DLD, and these students have specific language impairment and dyslexia and developmental language disorder. One of the articles that I think I gave you access to, yes, I did. It's in one of your folders from I believe it's day 2. And I talked about observable behaviors in students with syntactic weakness and just thinking about the kinds of oral language difficulties they have, as well as written language difficulties. Because the truth of the matter is, we don't have great diagnostic assessments. We have to become skilled at listening to kids' language and diagnosing what some of their challenges are, right? These are just some examples. Do I have a speech and language pathologist here? I know I did on day 1. I don't know if that person is still with us. if you're here and you don't mind identifying yourself, I promise I won't call on you. I'm just curious if we still have one. Doesn't look like we do. Oh, and thank you, Erin, for asking the question. Jenny, thank you for putting that in the chat. I appreciate that. So Jenny put the Reading League defining guide PDF in the chat, so you can grab that. And Erin asked defining connected text. And by that, I mean, thank you for responding. That's exactly right, Ines. We want kids to read connected text whenever possible. We don't want them spending countless instructional minutes and hours reading wordless. It's much more impactful if they can read connected text, whether it's decodable, if they're working on certain phonetic patterns, or it's more leveled, authentic text. Oh, Sarah, you're our SLP. Thank you. And you have been chiming in. So thank you very much. You don't have to turn your camera on, no worries. And Erin, you're not sure what we mean by connected text. Is that your question here? Like books as opposed to worksheets? Yeah, exactly. Books or passages. Yep, you got it. Because we want our students to continue to build their academic language. We want them to build their syntactic awareness and knowledge. They're not going to do that with words in isolation. Having said that, if you have kids who have phonological processing difficulties and need that practice reading words in isolation, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying think about the objective for doing it. Okay, so let's move on. In the article by Scott and Balthazar, they talk about assessment, and Sarah knows all about these assessments because Sarah is a speech and language pathologist. So I don't expect you all to necessarily be familiar, but just know that syntax is assessed by speech and language pathologists. That's their wheelhouse. That's what they do, and they know it very well, which is why I called out Sarah. If you have a speech and language pathologist, which I hope you all do in your school, when you have questions about these things, they are a wealth of information, and they can explain how sentence comprehension is measured in the CASTLE, which is a very frequently used assessment for kids who have language difficulties, listening comprehension on the Woodcock Reading Mastery, sentence recall, and sentence combining. These all measure different aspects of syntactic awareness. And in that article, the authors explain, what they're measuring and how they're measuring. But that's not something you're going to administer as a teacher. If you have a student that's identified with a speech SLI or DLD, you're gonna ask to learn more about what their difficulties are, and you're gonna ask to read a report so that the speech and language pathologist who conducted that evaluation can explain what the implications are, because that's what you need to know as a teacher, right? But I do want to take a moment to talk about sentence repetition, because sentence repetition is something that you can administer, and and you can do it informally. And I will, again, it's almost 10 o'clock already. I will go back and retroactively send some some PDFs of some things that might be valuable. And then I'll send them to Ines and Sarah and whoever else can put them into the Google folder for you, so that you can see some more examples of tasks that you as a teacher could administer. But what I want you to see here is that sentence repetition, according to these authors, and this was a recent study, argue that the sentence repetition tasks are the best way to assess children's language knowledge. And because we can see how much syntactic knowledge they have, and this knowledge guides comprehension. So performance on standardized assessments will automatically reflect the broader range of children's linguistic knowledge, but sentence repetition tasks are a sensitive measure of children's linguistic knowledge. And why is that true? And Sarah, if you're willing to chime in, but this is what I know because I'm not an SLP. What I know is if you give a child a sentence, let's look at the first one. The librarian has 12 new 8th grade science books reserved for us. Okay, that's a complex sentence structure. Right? Just look at that syntactically. And look at the next one. The boy bought a book for his friend who likes short stories. We have a relative clause there. When the students finished studying, they decided to get something to eat before going home. That's tricky. You have, right, dependent clauses when the students finish studying, and it's not necessarily in chronological order. And the last one, before the students were dismissed for lunch, they were told by the teacher to turn in their assignments, right? Would it be easier for them to repeat this if this were first? Students were told by the teacher to turn in their assignments before the students were dismissed for lunch. So these are just examples from the article that I just referenced here. And the article talks about working memory and sentence repetition, because a confounding variable is that many of our students who have difficulty, who have language-based difficulties, have difficulty with working memory. And is a sentence repetition task a working memory task? Yes, it is to a certain extent, but it also measures a student's syntax knowledge. Do they have these syntactic structures in their language? So I'm going to stop there for a moment. I don't know if Sarah is willing to say something. Okay. Sarah, would you mind coming off mute and talking for a bit about sentence repetition?
Oh, I guess I have my dog on my lap and there's a lot of noise in the background, but I just made a comment in the
chat.
In the chat there that often I'll find when administering the self students, and often I see a lot of kids that have ADHD and a lot of different diagnoses.
Or different.
But they'll delete those little chunks as you kind of parse there. So to me, that was that they don't have a knowledge of those syntactic forms. Yes, this is Harvey. Yeah, so that's
Thank you.
in line with what you're saying. And I would say because we do measures of working memory as well, and I don't find that, I'd be interested in reading the study, but I don't find that the working memory necessarily impacts. I find often the vocab will maybe trip up a student more than the working memory component, but yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate
if that's helpful. I don't know if you have any other questions.
It's very helpful. And it affirms what I've learned about sentence repetition and why it's a powerful assessment. And like I said, I'll put an informal assessment that we developed that has story recall and sentence repetition in it. And what we did with our teachers was we encouraged them to administer this to kids that they weren't sure about. Because as Sarah would tell you, a speech and language evaluation is a labor-intensive process, and most kids are not going to be cleared to go through a complete speech and language eval, even though many of them would benefit from having one done. And the other thing that is very common is that kids will have a speech and language eval and they don't qualify for services, and we miss them. So there's more and more being discussed right now about kids with developmental language disorders, and they actually are at risk, very much at risk, but we don't find them because we don't have screening tools for them. There is a new screening tool. There is an app that I put on my phone not too long ago I'm going to see if I can tell you. It's called Language Screen. And maybe Ines will find it and put it in the chat for us. It was developed by some researchers in England, in Oxford, including Charles Hume and Margaret Snowling, two very well-renowned researchers in the field of language learning disabilities. And I actually administered it to my almost 5-year-old granddaughter the other day. And it's easy. It's an app, and you can just see, does the child have a risk for being language, impaired, which we really need to find these kids early. They're there, but we don't have screening tools. We can find kids who are at risk for word reading. Phonemic awareness is super easy to give, as is nonsense word reading. Syntax is not the same, and comprehension is not the same. All right, so let me move on. And the other thing I'm sharing in terms of just tools for you to assess writing and including syntax is this writing assessment checklist that comes from our good friends at the Writing Revolution. And this is a handout that you'll find in the folder today that looks comprehensively at single paragraph, transition, outline, composition. This is more relevant for you middle school teachers who are with us today. So, but I wanted to just show you kind of what's available. Any questions about any of that before we move on? Okay. So
Hey,
I've,
Sorry, I have you know what? I'm trying to manage the chat and find these things, but I actually have my own question for you. So I'm just wondering,
thank you for doing a great job, by the way.
No, thank you, Beth. She found your the screening assessment. I was in the middle of typing out my question, but now that I'm here. I recently heard about something called the T unit as a measure of sentence development. Can you talk about that? Do you know anything about that?
I've heard it, but I don't know much about it. I bet Sarah does.
Okay. It just came across.
Time
Yep, go ahead.
I ever used that was, I would probably say about 20 years ago when I was working in a research lab for ADHD and sick kids. And it took, like, you're looking at each sentence and kind of parsing it based on. So if a student starts with and or but, then that would be like a new T unit. I don't remember enough of it. It's very, very labor intensive.
Okay.
Like very labor intensive. But I think there might be programs now. As I say, this was 20 years ago, but probably 25 years ago. So I think there's like programs that might, with AI, that you can probably streamline that process a little bit. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'd say it's more diagnostic, but
I think that's right. It's and there is software now, like there's a software that I think it's called SALT that analyzes kids' oral language into MLUs. What is that? Mean length of utterance, and other ways of analyzing students' language. And that's a wonderful thing that technology helps us. But as Sarah said, it's a labor-intensive process. In terms of, oh, thank you, Heidi. Aaron asked about the age of that. For that app, it's 3.5 to 11, age 11. And it took maybe 3 minutes to administer it to my little grandchild. And I think, again, because DLD is a big topic right now, where Tiffany Hogan's work and others is shedding light on how important it is that we get these diagnostics, these screeners and diagnostics, to learn more about the difficulties that children might have in language. So let me go back to my PowerPoint, and I've skipped targeted prompt feedback, but thank you. I think it was Beth who mentioned responsive teaching, which is really important, and corrective feedback, which is also very important. I think most of you are not do not have the luxury of working with 1 or 2 or 3 students at a time. Is that true? Most of you are in big classes. So, but I would say if you ever have a chance to work with a student one-on-one, especially a student who struggles with reading, it's so helpful to learn how to provide this corrective feedback and to make the instruction as dynamic and interactive as possible. But I want to talk now a little bit about scaffolding. And, you know, I pulled this from yesterday's PowerPoint because, you know, I think this is a great example of scaffolding, like giving students these templates or sentence starters or whatever it may be to give them the scaffold they need to be successful, and then thinking about when you can remove the scaffold. And then this last one, planned purposeful instructional decisions for tasks and text. So this is where lesson planning comes in. So I want to spend the rest of the morning that we have together thinking about lesson planning. And with lesson planning, we're going to select key area to focus on. And then we're going to plan how to address each focus area over the course of text, right? So I'm thinking about syntax instruction, you know, sort of as part of comprehension. And when we think about teaching a text, there are some things that we're going to do before we read the text, whether it's building background knowledge, pre-teaching vocabulary, whatever it may be, pulling out a couple sentences that may be problematic when they encounter them in the text. And also the analysis that we talked about yesterday. That's, to me, the before reading is the analysis that you will do of the text. It's not going to be exhaustive. It's going to hit a core concept that you're going to focus on for that lesson. Again, let's go back to our example of adjective clause. Let's say we've taught subject, predicate, who, do. Now I want them to expand the who, and I want to teach them explicitly those 3 questions. How many, what kind, which one? And I'm going to explicitly say that in my model, right? My I do. But before I get there, I'm going to, you know, in the before reading, I'm going to have already analyzed the text, and I'm going to pull out some sentences that have some nice adjectives and adjectival phrases to illustrate those 3 questions. So that's the before reading. The during the reading is I'm going to have the text, and I'm going to expect the kids to be reading the text, you know, maybe with me in part and then independently. But again, my explicit instruction there is going to focus on talking through those adjective phrases that are in those sentences. And then after reading, it's going to be a combination of what did you learn? You know, asking some specific questions about the text, asking them to tell you what is the job of an adjective, what is the job of the who, the do, right? Just reviewing some of the key concepts. And this is really with regard to syntax specifically. And we've, you know, talked about where does syntax fit into reading comprehension instruction. Obviously, it's here when we're taking a text and comprehending it, but then it will happen when we write about it. But it also, you know, might occur in the middle of, or, you know, might occur in a word reading focused lesson. So what do I mean by that? So if we think about the organizational structure of the day and your literacy block, I'm going to come off share for a moment. I want to ask you, for those of you who are teaching, or just respond to me, like where, if you haven't taught syntax before, where could you see it fitting in? And Beth, you've asked a clarifying question. Let me see what you've asked before we talk about this. Could this be done with read alouds? Absolutely. Absolutely. I haven't talked a lot about read alouds, but yes, for sure. We don't want to beat a dead horse with a read aloud, because I remember somebody was saying the other day that, you do your read aloud after lunch, the kids are chilling out on the mat or on the rug. So we don't want to beat it up, and overdo it, but it could be like the pre for an explicit lesson on something where you pull a couple of sentences out of the read aloud. And then Heidi chimed in, could be in the close reading of a text for sure. Not on the first read, but subsequent reads. Exactly. It's exactly right. I love the idea of multiple reads, especially for a book that has complex language. Read alouds are perfect for that. And yes, Rebecca, learning about reading comprehension strategies and doing close reading. I mean, syntax instruction ideally happens when you're working on comprehension per se. But I'm going to show you a lesson format, and I want you to sort of see other ways of fitting it in depending on where you're, what grade level you teach. This is a structured lesson, and it's in the handout. And so when we work with our teachers, we spend a lot of time kind of helping them figure out where to fit these things in. So I gave you a Word document of this just so you could tweak it if you want. But this is a typical kind of structured literacy lesson where we might do a warm up with a language skill, or we might do something with the alphabet. And then OG, structured literacy style, we're going to review letters and graphemes. We're going to pull words, both regular and irregular, from the text that we're going to have the student read. And then we're going to have a new learning, whatever it may be. We might do a specific phonemic awareness task, very, very quick. And then another new learning, depending. So the new learning could be learning a new letter formation, or it could be learning a different orthographic principle for reading words, or it could be reading a specific pattern. So you just list whatever it is, and then we're going to take the text that we're teaching with, and we're going to include a list of words, again, focused on that particular new learning, some phrases from the book, and some sentences. And this is a very comprehensive format that includes all the new learning. I gave you the Word document because you wouldn't necessarily include all of this in one lesson. But I want to show you where some of this syntax fits in. So we have a listening and reading comp, word meaning relationship aspect of the lesson, where again, we're going to pull out some meaning links, whether they're conjunctions, prepositions, or pronouns. We might pull out some multiple meaning words from the text that we know kids could be struggling with. And we could also pick out some other vocabulary words from the text. And then in terms of the syntax of that text, we're going to think about what is it about this text that lends itself to reinforcing some of the concepts that we've taught the students, whether it's the function of the words that we've talked about and doing a word function sort, an action expansion activity, a namer expansion activity, or writing a sentence with one of these structures. So that's just an example of a lesson plan that is comprehensive in scope that you would obviously tweak depending on how much time you have. I mean, the reality of this is how much time do you have is going to be a driver. I'm trying to move this around. Here we go. That's a big driver. I mean, we worked in fourth and fifth grade classrooms for the last two years, and our teachers had small group instruction for 15 minutes, 3 days a week. And this kind of lesson format is not going to work with 25 kids. It's only going to work in a small group with, say, 4 or 5 kids, and you have to streamline the lesson. What we did was we created a 3-day lesson plan. So in day 1, you're going to do these first 3 things. In day 2, you're going to do the next 3 things that are on that lesson plan that you just saw. And on day 3, I'm going to do more of the contextual reading and maybe do more of the focus on comprehension. So you have to think about, what's your reality? How much time do you have? And ideally, you're doing this with the kids who are struggling, right? In, whether it's reading, words, comprehension, or both. I understand from yesterday's chat that most of you have lost your reading interventionists, which is a shame, because those reading interventionists presumably were teaching those small groups. Now you don't have them to do that. So it's on you, right? And how do you fit all that in is a big question. Does anybody want to say anything about that before I move on? Okay. And this is another handout that comes from a book by Marty Haugen and Susan Smart called The Fundamentals of Literacy Instruction and Assessment. I like this lesson plan template, which is why I included it in your handouts. Let me go back for a second. I'm going to show you this one too. It is, I put so much stuff in here. Here it is. It's Appendix C lesson plan template. And I like it because, you have your target students. Is it whole class or small group? What's your objective? What resources do you need to teach this lesson? What's your review of previous learning? And then it really does carve this lesson up into the I do, we do, and you do. What's your differentiation going to look like? And how are you going to monitor the student's progress? And you might have to divide this lesson up into 2 parts, depending, because this lesson would take, in my humble opinion, at least a half an hour to go through all of those steps and do it well. So you have to think about that. Okay. Oh, I also want to show you, this is an informal writing assessment, which one of my mentors made. Oh, why aren't you opening? Okay. And the way this works is you get a sample of your students' writing, and you just count how many words they wrote in their sentence, how many adjectives, how many adverbs. Was it a simple or complex sentence? Did they include any where, when, why phrases, right? Did they use a robust verb, etc.? And it's an easy little snapshot of your kids' development in their sentence writing skills. And so you can do this and date it and then see how their sentence writing improves over time. Okay. Now I want to, if you joined, let me see. Oh no, this is Anita Archer. I don't know if you've seen this video of Anita, but I love it because it exemplifies explicit instruction, the I do, we do, and you do, and it explains what we mean by that. So if you haven't seen it, if you've seen it, I've seen it 100 times, and I always get something out of it. So hopefully it's useful today for you all too. Can you all see? Okay.
So I have the gift today of talking to you about explicit instruction. Explicit instruction simply is instruction that is quite direct. It is unambiguous with the goal that the students would get it, would understand it, and would learn. We have a lot of confusion around the term explicit instruction, so let me sort of augment and add to that. One question I'm often asked is, wouldn't it be more motivating for students to learn it on their own, to discover it, to use authentic problems to discover it? And it's as if we have set up a total dichotomy between explicit instruction and discovery, but we really should view it as a continuum. And when we look at the research on instruction, we learn what are the attributes of that continuum. For example, if you are teaching children that are novices, that have just never learned this body of knowledge in the past, it appears that they do much better if we explicitly teach them the information, whether it's knowledge or skills or strategies, that we teach it. If they are learning a body of knowledge that they've not learned in the past, they're brand new to algebra, they are new to decoding of words, then they really benefit from very explicit instruction. So those two things, when the student is a novice, when the knowledge is new, explicit instruction would be desirable. But then after you've gained lots of information, you've gained lots of skills, then discovery is much more a viable option, but only after you had explicit instruction. So one of the things that I also would be reminded of is the research. If you happen to be a special ed teacher, an interventionist, and you are working with struggling students, we definitely know that they are going to gain more with very explicit instruction than discovery. You know, if they had discovered it, they would not have been struggling. And so we need to have very explicit instruction for them. And what would that mean? Well, we could actually take explicit instruction and put it into two areas. One is the design of the instruction, and the other is the delivery of the instruction. And the design of the instruction means that we pick important content to teach them, we break it down into obtainable pieces, but then our lessons are organized so that more learning could occur. For example, I often talk about three major steps in teaching children skills and strategies, where I do demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding. I do it, we do it, you do it. And many of the skills and strategies we teach would follow that pedagogy. But it also means that the students are not only directly taught it, but they have practice. And actually, I'm going to tell you, my concern is often that we're not giving adequate practice. I constantly hear people say, well, you know, Anita, that is just drill and kill, drill and kill. And I can tell you, we have no reported incidents of children dying of practice. Instead, look at the research, the abundant research from cognitive science and from learning on practice. The students need deliberate practice where they're practicing with a purpose. They need practice that is spaced over time, not all in one session. And they need to retrieve information in that practice. So it's a combination of very explicit instruction with I do it, we do it, you do it, followed with deliberate and space practice and retrieval. But here's what I've noticed. I've had the great blessing of teaching for 52 years and do demonstrations all throughout every year. And what I have noticed is that students need better delivery skills than we've done in the past. For example, all instruction needs to be interactive. I say something, you say something, I write something, you write something. All explicit instruction would be very interactive with students actively engaged throughout the entire lesson. And we would give them, we'd monitor and watch their responses, give them feedback on the responses, and we would maintain throughout the whole lesson a very perky pace. So those are some of the attributes of having very explicit instruction. And we know that then I set you up for your ability to solve authentic problems. I set you up for being successful. I set you up to generalize information to other situations. But this means we got to keep the teach in teacher. And we have to provide the teaching that our students need. So let us never forget the research on explicit instruction, because if learning is our goal, then a lot of explicit instruction needs to occur there. Bless you in your career. May you thrive as an educator.
I love Anita. If you ever have an opportunity to see her in action, I highly recommend it. She's amazing. But if you can't see her in action, there's lots of YouTube videos of her doing her thing, and she's a master. She's an absolute master at explicit instruction, and she's a kick. And she's alive and kicking. She's older than I am by a fair amount. Anyway, I thought that was important to just illustrate this whole concept of I do, we do, you do. And then I want to talk a little bit about this because at the bottom of that infographic that I showed you, where we talk about integrated language, reading and writing instruction, that's really a hallmark, right, of structured literacy, is that we're going to integrate all these things. We're not going to teach phonemic awareness in isolation. I don't know if any of you are on the list, the Spell Talk listserv, but that listserv has had many, many conversations over the last few years about phonemic awareness. Should you do it with your eyes closed or not? Oh my goodness. I'm a pragmatist. I say do it whichever way works for the kids, right? But we know how important phonemic awareness is. We know how important phonics is. We know how important spelling is. Spelling is so very important. It contributes to orthographic mapping and reading fluency. We know how important vocabulary, word meaning is. We know how important reading fluency is. This fourth bullet, explicitly teaching automaticity and reading and writing fluency at the sentence, at the paragraph, at the text levels with guided practice. That's what these 4 days have been about, right? And then explicitly teaching strategies for extracting meaning. Again, at the word, sentence, paragraph, and text level. So it's the integration, I think, that is challenging, to be honest with you. And so what I want to show you, you may have seen this video, but it usually is a crowd pleaser. So I'm going to show it again. And what I want you to think about is, you know, as we kind of wrap up our 4 days and what you've learned from these workshops on syntax, and how Elke Blanchard, one of my mentors, kind of integrates a number of things, right, into this short lesson. Now, this lesson was probably about 20, 25 minutes long, maybe a half an hour, but we edited it, and you'll see we highlight certain things we want you to pay attention to. But I also want you to see how she integrated a number of different skills into the lesson, and write those down just so that you can write them down. You could put them in the chat if you want to do it that way. Actually, putting in the chat is a good idea because I really want to elicit some feedback from you. This was a kindergarten classroom, so keep that in mind. And so I'll show you now Elke in action.
You know the gesture. This one? Do everybody make this gesture? Look, they're all right here too, with the letters that it goes with. So today, now that you're warmed up, you know what our vowels say, right? You're not going to have a difficult time reading these words. So I'm going to have you read some words. You have to decide if the word that you're reading tells me who, So that means it could be a person, a place, or a thing, or an animal. Or does it tell me an action? Is my word an action word that I'm reading? All right. So let's read this first word together. Oh, let's find, I see that was fast. Is run, is that a who or is that something we do?
Do.
It's something we do. Can you put it under the do column, please? Okay, is it a who or is it something we do? You have, make your fingers hop. You can, if you can make it happen, it's something that you do. All right, so now we have who's and we have do's. And in order to make a sentence, you have to have a who and a do. You get to choose who you want to talk about and what they're going to do. And we're going to start off our sentence where we're going to say with a capital letter. So now say this. The
frog swims.
Good. You want to use it? Pull that over. All right. And look what you said, swims. And that's so great. Guess what I have? I have your S there because we don't say the frog swim. We say the frog
Swims.
And then what do I have to, what do you think is on my last card? All right. Can you say your sentence now? Go ahead.
The frog swims.
Have your students say it. You're the teacher. Say, okay, everybody say the sentence.
Okay, everybody, sing the sentence. The frog swims.
Now, can you add to it for me? Can you tell me where he swims? Who could tell me where he swims? In the pond?
Yeah.
Okay, let me put these out. In the
pond.
Good. Let's read that sentence now. Ready and go.
The frog swims in the pond.
I'm going to change it to this. Now, what does the sentence say? Read the sentence to me.
The frog swims.
And let's go back to in the pond. Let's change it to not just in the pond. Let's change it to in the big. You want it to be big or little? Big. The big pond. Okay. Ready? Go ahead.
The frog swims in the big pond.
Now, let's say this together. The frogs. And then let's say this. Swim. And then let's say all of this together in the big pond. So say that as a chunk. Ready? We're going to do it this way. The frogs. And instead of saying the frogs, say the frogs swim in the big pond. Say it this way. In the big pond.
In the big pond.
Good. Ready? Let's now you do it all by yourselves.
The frog
Let's say it this way. The frogs
swims in the big pond.
Now we don't say swims. Now we just say swim. If I say the frog, then I have to say swims. That's funny. Let's try it that way. What's this say again? In the
big pond.
in the big pond. In the big pond. Ready? Go.
The frog
Say it this way. The frog
swims in the big pond.
Here's your the. All right. The dog. What is the dog going to do? Or does he sit on the floor?
He sits on the floor.
On the floor. Okay. Let's move that over here like this. On the floor. What kind of floor does he sit on? A soft? A hard?
No, a hard floor.
On a hard floor. All right, ready? Let's read it.
The dog sits in the
Hard
floor.
All right.
Now I see.
Let's count and see how many words we have in this sentence.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7 words. Oh my goodness. 7 and with the period. Look, when you come up to a 7-word sentence, it's a 7-up. You made 7 word sentence. It's a 7-up with the period.
All right. So I hope you saw a lot of different things happening in that little video clip. I wrote some things down too. You got the 7-Up. Jenny said there was an adjective phrase, which is amazing. Yep, exactly. An adverb phrase too. Yep. What else? Come off mute if you like, just for a moment and just tell me what anybody. The blank index cards. Thank you for saying that, Desiree, because these are kindergarten children. And so we are not asking them to read these words necessarily. It's an oral language exercise, right? The multiple meaning words, I thought, were important because when she was sorting, she kind of acknowledged the fact that some of these words might be multiple meaning. Punctuation, yes. Prosody was hard for these kids. She was trying to get them to read in those grammatical entities, and that was really hard because they're 5 years old. The verb work, I love that too, Sarah. I really wanted you to, so super simple, a little S on a sticky note, and you move it around because verb tense is hard for some kids. Noun verb agreement, exactly. I love when she said, what's a sentence? Starts with a capital letter. That's programmed in. The cards are also great for sentence segmentation. Yes, definitely. And concretely moving the cards. Perfect. Yeah, it's such a simple thing, right? And again, maybe hard to do with 25 kids, no doubt about it. Because explicit instruction is hard with your whole class. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Let me go back to, oh, you probably noticed when I was, I don't know if you saw my screen went blank for a moment because I airdropped something to myself. And now I have to see if I can find it. Because I tried to get the CFAL so you could see that. But where is it now? Hold on. It was dropped to me. It was airdropped to me. But I don't see it. Shoot. Let's see. Oh, well, I'll find it later. Martha, you have to run. Okay. See you later, Martha. It was wonderful to see you and be with you. All right, let me go back to the PowerPoint and I'll see if I can find that CFAL document in a second. This is just a little visual of how we want to integrate literacy across content subjects. So we're going to make sure we explicitly teach PA and phonics to early readers and struggling readers that have word recognition difficulties. Vocabulary is extremely important in all subjects, and syntax is something that we can teach through ELA, through social studies, math, and science, and the integration is really important. So this is my integration slide, and it just illustrates how we can think about teaching these 3 skills, PA phonics, vocabulary, and syntax, through ELA, social studies, math, and science, and the integration within comprehension and written expression. Now, I know I have time for Q&A, and I also want, like I said, to show you, before we do the Q&A, I did find that CFAL, and it went onto my computer somewhere, but God only knows where. So let me find it. Give me a second. But while we're doing that, please feel free to put a question in the chat. Because you specifically asked, and I know Martha was one of the people who asked about diagnostic assessments. This is one that I that relatively new. Can you see my screen? Okay. This is a relatively new assessment developed by Acadience. Acadience is one of the distributors of Dibbles, one of the publishing companies of Dibbles. And the CFAL stands for comprehension, fluency, and oral language. It assesses story coherence and text structure, listening and reading comprehension, vocabulary and oral language, including formal definitions, morphological awareness, figurative language, and syntax, and then fluency with expository and narrative texts. It's a diagnostic assessment, and I feel like it's, it's a good one. And it's relatively easy to administer. Has anyone heard of it or used it? Anyone here? Nope. Okay. Well, check it out. Again, it's meant to be administered by gen ed teachers as well as special ed teachers. You don't have to be a special speech and language pathologist to administer it. It does talk about, getting trained, but why we use it, untangle reasons why a student may struggle with comprehension, and providing target interventions to those skill areas that I mentioned up here. And it does have a syntactic awareness assessment. And there just aren't very many of those out there, as we've talked about. Let me go back to my PowerPoint just quickly to show you. Did that. Just some of the references that I've mentioned throughout the last 4 days. I didn't put every reference here because it would be a long list, but the ones that I thought are worth taking a look at. And many of these are available on Google Scholar, or I put them in the articles section of your handouts each day, some of them, not all of them. And then here's some resources that I wanted to call attention to. Nancy Hennessy wrote a book called The Reading Comprehension Blueprint, and she and her colleague Julie Salomon wrote a Reading Comprehension Blueprint activity book, which is excellent. This is a handbook just to build your knowledge about syntax, but to be honest with you, I think this is as good a website as I've seen, that OWL Purdue, which is Purdue Online Writing Lab, that will, if you're not confident about your terminology, then and what those terms mean and what their functions are, I would say check that out. And then William Van Cleve, his resources are great. This is just a cute little something we made for a family engagement grant that we got to teach families about literacy. And we actually taught them about syntax, but in very, parent and kid-friendly terms. And we had these stupendous sentences, bookmarks that we handed to them. So this is just an example of something that you might do, because we gave away books and we taught them about telling more about the action, telling more about the namer, and how you can expand sentences. So if you want to use that, by all means, please do. Before we do the poll, I do want to take some questions, and I thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you like the bookmarks too. I want to just look at any questions that you have here. Jenny asked if the CFAL is free, and unfortunately is not. I don't know what it costs, to be honest. It's a kit. But because there's so little out there, maybe you can convince your school to invest in it. It's a couple $100. It's not a crazy amount. Enos, is it intended for gen ed classrooms for all students? Yes, but specifically the CFAL is designed to probe further about kids that have comprehension difficulties. But as I said, it could be administered by anyone, really. It's a relatively straightforward assessment. And as I said, yes, if we have concerns, for sure. Any other questions? So in closing, and I'll put this in the chat, or not in the chat, but in the folder. Can you see my screen? Like I said, this is an assessment that we developed a number of years ago to assess students' oral language through sentence repetition and story recall. And the directions are here. So I'll send the whole document to you. The story is, you read this story called The Lost Toy to the children. And here's the story. And then you ask them to repeat these sentences and you have to score them. It's very somewhat objective, right? Subjective. Darren got a Spider-Man toy for his birthday, and it gives you some guidance for how to score that. Did he say it perfectly? He gets a 3. If he omitted one word, he gets 2, etc. Then you also do a story recall. So it gives you these very explicit directions on how to administer and score, directions for analysis. This is the analysis of the narrative retell. Did they include all the aspects of the story, all the elements of the story? And did they include some important conjunctions, right? Mental verbs, more conjunctions, etc. And then some examples of how the student scored. And another sample analysis. So I will put that in the chat. Again, sorry, I keep saying put that in the chat. I'm not going to put it in the chat. It won't let me, but I will include that and send it off to Enos and others so that you get it into that Google folder. Because to your point, there's not a lot, or to our conversation, there's not a lot to assess syntax, and it's such an important aspect of comprehension. I wish there were more out there to do, but it would be, I would love to hear from you if you decide that you want to use that assessment. If you have any questions, let's see, I don't think I've finished sharing the last slide, which is really important slide, and that is my contact information. Can you all see that? Okay, so feel free to email me, margiegillis@literacyhow.com, with questions that you might have about any of the things that we've talked about over the last 4 days.
So Margie, that last assessment that you just shared, Aviva is asking, what grade would that be appropriate for?
That would be appropriate for 4, 5 years old on up. We do have an older version of that. So we made the Lost Toy is really more probably relevant or interesting to a first or second or maybe even third grader. But we also developed a screener, not a screener, sort of like a screener. No, I guess it's more of a diagnostic, I would say, called the Clincher. And the Clincher is about it's a baseball story, you know. It's maybe more appealing to, do you all play baseball in Canada?
Absolutely.
Okay, I thought so. I wanted to make sure. All right.
And that one would be for older, for older students. That would be for older students. Yeah. Would you be able to share that one with us?
Oh yeah, I'll send both to you.
I know lately it feels like we've been doing a lot for our K-2, K-3 students, and we have a huge population of students and teachers in junior and intermediate grades that are always hungry for more as well. So thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. This is my, this is my mission work, and I'm especially interested in supporting areas that are under-resourced. And I'm always on the lookout for things that will be useful for your instruction, because it's going to matter for your students, and that's what we care most about. All right. You all have a great rest of your day and rest of your week and a great weekend. I hope the weather continues to be nice and I hope you get those fires under control. So sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Margie, for all of this. A lot of appreciation and thanks in the chat. So thank you so much for doing this with all of us.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.